Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Movies with Malice. I thought since my last episode I mentioned it and so many people have questions about it, I would talk about the documentary that I'm in called TAR HEROIN, Dark Into the Streets. Longest title ever. This is also on YouTube. I do not own the rights to anything with this movie. It was originally on HBO back in the day, and wow, there's a lot to discuss with this. First of all, the title. It should have been called A Bunch of Kids on the Streets Doing a Bunch of Different Drugs, because heroin was not the only drug everyone was doing in this movie, and that should have been said, because if you read the comments, which I should never have done, on YouTube, it's like a bunch of people like, they're fucking not just doing heroin, blah 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 blah, and like people are complaining about the semantics of what drugs, and then people start getting in these arguments about what drug is better. And I'm going to say that I haven't done drugs now since 2001. That includes alcohol and weed for me, and I'm not judging, I'm just saying I don't fuck around anymore. And that's because I learned that I can't just do a little bit of anything. So to talk about this movie, they filmed, let me tell you first how they found me. So the people that were doing this documentary were basically hanging out at the Needle Exchange in San Francisco in the early 90s, somewhere around like 95 or something. And they were basically just asking people if they wanted to be in their documentary. And they asked me probably 3 or 4 times, and I kept saying no. But what's fucked up about me is I started to see the kids that they were filming. And I didn't know those kids at the time, but I didn't think that it's really weird how punks back in the day, or people that were like in that kind of a lifestyle, had like a what's the word where you think you're kind of better than other people but you're not. I don't know, there's a word for it, but there was like a division where I was like a squatter punk and these kids were kind of what we called shelter punks. Not all of them, but a bunch of them. And I didn't want like the documentary to like just show shelter punks, because I thought they were going to give like heroin a bad name, which is so stupid when I think about it now, because it shouldn't have a good name. But you also have to realize at this time, like in the 90s, I also didn't think that I would live to be 21. I was about 21 when they were filming it, but I mean, I didn't think I would live to be like 25 or something. I was like, like I thought I would die that year. And honestly, I did die like 3 times back then. So when I agreed to do the documentary, is basically 2 reasons. One, because I thought that people couldn't blame heroin for all the bad shit that they were doing, and I wanted to make that a point. And then I also wanted to just leave some evidence that I lived, because I didn't think I would live, like I said, to be 25. I thought the world was going to end or I was going to die, so there'd be some evidence that I existed at some point. And not that it really matters, but I really just thought at the time, like, then I'll have some evidence. And I never thought I would live to ever see it. And I didn't know that it was going to be on HBO, and I didn't know that eventually there would be this thing called the internet and everyone would be able to see it, and I would never be able to not acknowledge it, because people consistently throughout my life ask me about it and ask me, like a lot of questions about like the other kids. And, like, I have to be honest, I don't really know what happened to a lot of the other kids in there. The one that we still keep in touch with is Tracy, who's in here, who's the main character in this, and I respect her a lot. She's like a counselor in recovery in San Francisco now, and you can find her, I think it's Tracy H415 is her Instagram, and she's super awesome, and she did an update, I think, about this on YouTube. If you look up TAR HEROIN, Dark in the Streets, I think she did a couple updates that are like the best updates we have on what happened to the other kids, because she was closer with a lot of those other kids, because like I said, I thought I was cooler because I didn't sleep in shelters. I slept in abandoned buildings. Like, I think that's so stupid now, but back then there was there was this weird division between that. I mean, I was also like, when I was a punk on the streets too, we thought that if you paid rent, you were like a poser. Like if you paid rent, like now I love paying rent because I love having showers, and I like having my own place where I can lock the door and no one can come in. When I lived in abandoned buildings, I couldn't do that. Anyone could come in at any time, and a cop could come in there and kick me in the face, which happened. So, you know, in this documentary, they follow all of us kids around. I think it was over a period of about 3 years, and they watched us progressively get more and more addicted to drugs. And I think when I started filming this, I would be hitchhiking back and forth from Seattle, Portland to San Francisco a lot. So I wasn't really getting as strung out as fast as a lot of the other kids. And I want to mention also how drugs and alcohol work for everyone is if you have an addiction disorder, and you won't know until it's too late. If you have that, everything's progressive. Of course, when you first start doing it, you're not like the people that are doing it 10 years in advance of you. You know, it's because I hate when people are like, you know, like some people like in the comments were like, dude, she wasn't even a real junkie. She didn't blah, 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 this or that, you know, which is like, you understand how it works, right? When people start using, they don't really have the same addictive behavior as when they are using later on, you know, like it's progressive, you know, just like alcoholics. Alcoholics don't start out like having DTs, you know, you get that later on in life after it progresses to a point. You don't wake up with cirrhosis. It takes years for it to develop. Anyway, that's just one thing that's always a pet peeve of mine, where people like don't understand that you're not a junkie the day you start. It takes a while for it to really, you become this thing. And excuse Dahmer. And you know, so they're filming all of us kids, and you know, we're not really kids, but we were kind of kids, a lot of us super immature. And you know, like I talked about how, you know, it was the one thing that I wanted to do in life and I should be allowed to do it. And I'm kind of like still an anarchist when it comes down to it. Like, you know, like I might have used AA and NA to get sober, but I don't think it's the end all be all for everyone. And I've always had that kind of like live and let live mentality. Like that's why I'm like not judgy towards people that are like still using whatever drug or alcohol that they're using. You know, I'm kind of just like, well, everyone has their own path with that, and they have their own stuff that they need to learn. If anyone asks me how to get off drugs, I'll be the first one to like talk to them about how, but I'm not going to go around preaching to people, and I'm not going to judge people that are still in that, or, you know, tell them how to live their lives, because, you know, I look back on what I did and I'm really lucky that I made it through, but I don't know if I would have done it different either, because I think I needed to learn that about myself, and I'm honestly kind of glad that I learned it like with heroin rather than alcohol, just because it's so much harder to figure out if you have a problem on alcohol than it is on heroin. Kind of like with heroin, it's so socially unacceptable that, you know, kind of day one that you're kind of like fucked up, you know, like even if you're not a junkie yet, you kind of know it's like, it's not cool, and nobody really thinks it's cool. And it sucks that nowadays everyone's doing shit that's like fentanyl and all those other drugs that are like, you know, pill form or whatever, so they think that they're not junkies, but it's the same shit, you know, like that's why all these young rappers and stuff are dying, and it's like heartbreaking because it's like socially acceptable, and that makes it worse, because if it's socially acceptable, no one's going to tell them don't fucking do this, because it's not cool to tell people not to do drugs, right? So anyways, that's why people end up dying. And one of the other things I want to talk about in this movie that always bothers me is, you know, they seem to ask a lot of the other kids in this movie about their childhood and their history and like why they ended up being a junkie. And it's kind of like, you know, like that same old story, like I was abused, I had this happen, this made me this, and da 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 da. And that's true, and it's true for me as well. But at the same point, you know, I think addiction runs through people of all sorts of backgrounds. It's just that they happen to find a group of us that were also like homeless. So of course our stories are a little more similar. But I'm sure they could have found like business people that were also abused by their parents that didn't end up homeless, that didn't end up, whatever. It's just, I don't know. Life is weird how, we all have, our childhood affects how we become so much. And then if we don't do something to correct our childhood, we end up having all sorts of issues, and like, it just sucks that there's no, I feel like there should be some kind of psychology that happens when you're in school, like some kind of psychology class that they give you to help you deal with the issues that you get just from being a child. Because everyone has these issues, and it's just like one little thing goes wrong, and then it triggers you onto this path to be like some kind of drug addict. Because what happened to me is I was taken away from my mom and put in foster care. And foster care, so it's such a hard story to talk about because I don't want to like trash on my mom. My mom was kind of an abusive parent back then, but she was an alcoholic and she didn't know what she was doing and she blacked out a lot. But I forgive her because I still knew she loved me, and she didn't really have the best way of showing it, but she did. I did feel loved, and I loved being with her and my sister growing up. And anyway, foster care for me was worse because these were people that were taking care of me, that were getting money from the state, that really never showed me love. And when I was kicked out of foster care, that was like a serious abandonment issue for me. And I felt, it's like I never felt abandoned by my mom or my sister or anybody, but I felt abandoned by society because it was like society's job to like raise me when I'm in foster care, right? Like society developed that, so the foster care system should make sure that I'm taken care of. That's the way I look at it. If they're going to take you away from your family, then they should be taking care of you and have a plan when that falls through. But they didn't. And when my foster parents kicked me out, I was homeless. And they don't really talk about that in this movie. And that didn't make me a junkie, but it did help bring about a path for me to like be open to that, because I was like, my mom's an alcoholic. I don't want to be an alcoholic. I'm just going to do drugs. Like I'm going to just smoke weed, and then I'm just going to do, like some other drugs. And I started getting into, harder drugs and harder drugs. It would start out coke, and then it's meth, and then it's heroin, and then it's everything. And, so, that's the other thing, when you get on the streets, it's like really hard to get off because you start to adapt to that life. And then, like you deal with like the daily life of that where you're hungry a lot and you're outside in the cold. Sometimes you're sleeping on the streets. Sometimes you're sleeping in an abandoned building and it's cold and all that other shit. And you kind of need to get high to survive it. Like it's really, really unpleasant if you're not on drugs. If you are on drugs, it's bearable, And, so I feel like people look at homeless people and they're like, oh, I'm not going to give that person change because they're just going to spend it on drugs. And like, that could be true, but like, if you had to sleep outside and, eat out of the trash, wouldn't you want to be high too? Like, I don't know. This is the thing, is like, I know that there's a lot of people that will hate on people that are like homeless and be like, well, like, how come they can't get a job? And like, that's an able-bodied human and, all this shit. And I agree with that to an extent as well. Like, but there should be programs to help people that want to help themselves, because when you have no life skills and you weren't taught that by your parents, you weren't taught that by the state or by the school, how are you supposed to know how to like fill out a job application and how to like just do that basic kind of paperwork to like forms to get grants to go to college or do better your education? And like, it's not as easy as people make it out to be. And everyone's situation is different. And I think that people don't give people's experiences credit, you know, like I just know that because, you know, like I read the comments that are in this movie on YouTube, and it's just like, all those people should die, they're disgusting, they're parasites, and like, you know, people say some horrible shit. And you know, some people just don't know what it would be like to be put in a position where you feel that you were thrown into it, you know, like you don't feel like it's really your fault, and then you have a hard time getting over it, you know. Like when I was kicked out of foster care, I really felt it was super unjust, and I couldn't deal with the reality that it's not my fault, and I felt like I had a right to like rage about it, you know. I had a right to be mad about it, you know. But I'm glad that I didn't stay in that forever as well, because, you know, if you do like just stay in the past and you can't ever get over something, then you never do grow and you never do get better. And you know, like, so I stayed out on the streets from, you know, the age of 17 until about 27. And I think, like, you know, people are like, well, how did you get off heroin? And I'm like, or what made you want to get off heroin? It's such a group of things. Like, it starts off with it being like the ODing 3 times. That's always like in the back of my mind that, you know, like I died, you know. And even though you don't, like when you overdose, like as a junkie, a lot of times you don't really remember what that feels like or what it is, but you know that it happened and you know that it wasn't good. So I would always like think that's fucked up that happened to me, but not really be able to process it because it doesn't seem real. But that's always something that I'm like, oh, that I don't want to die either. But I also was like having a hard time accepting the reality of this world, and I didn't really want to live. It's like this limbo, like I don't want to like continue this life, but I also don't want to die. Like, what do I do? And you know, then I started after they left me in this documentary, like they showed the last thing they showed of me is like I got sober for a minute, and that was like I was dating this guy Jackie at the time, and it was really because he wanted to get sober all the time, and so I'd kick with him, but I didn't really want that. And so I went back to Olympia at that time, and I started selling. Well, I'd already been selling heroin, and so I went back to selling, and then he went back with me to do that. And then we continued doing that, moved to Austin, Texas, started doing more of that. And then after, I don't know, a few years in Texas, I ended up going to prison for selling heroin. And I think that was a big eye-opener for me because I was in for 9 months. And, you know, it's just like Tracy in this movie. She's in there for, I think, the same amount of time. Like she's in there for 9 months or something. And it's like that time where you're the first time you're forced to be sober for a long period of time. And you just start to really think about like your past and your path, and just be like, wow, if I keep doing this is just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse, and I'm going to end up being like all the people that I didn't want to become. And you know, before I got out of prison, I like was like, I'm going to get a job when I get out, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to make something better about my life. But then when you're released, you don't have ID, you don't have an apartment or a place to live, and you don't have a job, and you can't get a job without ID and an address, and you can't get an address without a job, and you can't get an ID without an address. And it's like this cycle, and I was just like, I can't. So I mean, I ended up back out on the streets, back selling drugs. And Jackie, the guy that I was with in this documentary, in the end, he got out the same day as me. So we ended up being together again. And I was just like, our relationship is like toxic. And like he kept trying to get sober. And I was like, I can't. So I dumped him to continue being a junkie. And he went on to like drink alcohol or whatever. But I think in the end, for me, what really started to fuck with my head is so then I was alone in Texas, and I didn't really associate with a lot of people. I started doing private show dancing there, which I actually liked. Do bachelor parties, birthday parties. The couple that I worked for were a little weird though. But I met this guy who lived in a house where it was a University of Texas professor that realized he was gay at the age of 60. And so he basically just started smoking crack. And then he moved in his crack dealer, which is a guy named Stepa or something. And he's like kind of like this like pimp dressed like black guy that looked kind of cool, that I was friends with because he was a crack dealer that liked to do a little bit of heroin. And so I would always sell him just a little bit of heroin so he wouldn't be all like fucked off on crack, or he would have some shit to come down off his crack with. And so then I'm living in, I told Stevie Weeby on his show some of this story too. So I lived in, but this crack house was so gnarly for me that I think it was like me seeing my future before I got there, because it was like, I'm gonna be like these people. And it's like, so I'm living in this crack house, and because they moved me in because I didn't like paying rent. It was like $200 a month. I'm living in this pantry. I got this like Shar-Pei pit bull mixed dog from these kids on the streets, and I'm trying to take care of this dog. And just every morning waking up like in this this house, and the like University of Texas professor like running around masturbating, and like his like crack dealer guy is getting his dick sucked by other dudes, and like just shit that was going on in this house was like, I can't unsee this, and I don't want to be this, like I don't want this to be my life. And like I kept thinking like, how long till I'm like them, you know, like I don't want to be like my whole life is this drug, but it is. Like I was like, I am like them. Like, why do I think I'm better than these people when I'm doing this and I'm living here, I'm in this house, I'm this. And I just, you know, and I also realized at the same time I wasn't being a good dog mom to my dog Zeus that I had, the Shar-Pei pit bull mix. And I was like, I'd be there, he needs to go for a walk, but I'm too busy trying to find a vein. And I was like, this is awful. Like this dog needs love, and he needs to be out and doing fun dog shit, but I'm here fucking my life up. So I didn't tell anybody. I saved up money. I got a plane ticket. I went up to Portland and went to my sister's house. Honest truth. Thought I wanted to get sober, but still didn't believe I could. So I told my sister I was just going to rent a hotel room with the dog and like kick using some Xanax and Klonopin or whatever. And my sister was like, no, you're not. You're going to stay here tonight, and then tomorrow you're going to go to Hooper Detox, which is a cool thing that they have in Portland, and they should have this in every city. Hooper Detox is a place where you can go detox from drugs or alcohol or whatever, and you can be there for like a week detoxing, and then they have people that can help get you into a rehab from there. And you kind of sometimes have to jump through some hoops to get there, and sometimes you have to sleep outside in front of the building to get in, and like all sorts of shit. But like, I love that place, and I love that they give you a place to like get off the drugs before you can start to do the intake to go to a rehab. And you know, so I did that. They fast tracked me into a program, and it was called the mentor program that I graduated from. And the mentor program also they should have in every city and every state. The mentor program is like a rehab that's made by ex-addicts that help new addicts, but they also went to school to get counseling, to be counselors, you know, or they went to school to become counselors. Anyway, because my junkie mind probably wouldn't have been able to accept a person who just went to school to learn about drugs to tell me how to not be on drugs. It really helped me a lot to hear it from people that had been there before. So, you know, like, also I couldn't bullshit those people because they'd all been there before. So they'd be like, you know, if I was like, hey, I'm gonna go out to this party, you know, or whatever, they'd be like, who is gonna be there? What kind of party it's gonna be? And if I tried to bullshit them, they'd look me in the eye and they'd be like, I don't think you should go. You know, like, you aren't that sober yet, you haven't done all your step work, you haven't, you know, you probably shouldn't be around a bunch of people doing drugs or even smoking weed right now. And they were right, you know, about a lot of things. But you know, I think they show this documentary, I hear, in a lot of like rehabs and stuff like that, and I think it's weird for them to do it because it's, on one hand, like it shows like people's lives getting shittier, but also it's super triggering for a lot of people that are early in recovery because they show a lot of people shooting up. They really don't need to do that. And it's one of the things that I think can come across as like glamorizing about heroin, but it's also, it just depends on your mindset. Like if you're a person that wants to use, that's glorification or glamorization. But definitely for anyone who's not trying to use, it's more of a deterrent because I don't want to use, and watching people shoot up doesn't make me want to use, you know. I don't think that, like, in my mindset, I think when I first saw this, I was still getting loaded and it just made me want to get more loaded. So if you're early in recovery or you haven't really like worked a program or something yet, it might not be the best thing for you to watch unless you have someone there you can talk with about it. But if you've already, you know, like been sober for a while, it might be more of a deterrent for you to watch it, to be like, oh, I could end up like that, or I have been like that before and I don't want to be like that again. Because that's the way I look at it. Like, I don't, like, I look at my life back then and I'm just like, it sucks so bad to not be able to like tell my old self what I know now, you know, like, oh, the stupidity. It's so mind blowing. But yeah, I do think it's still a good watch for, you know, just something from the 90s also, for people just to see kind of some of the style of the 90s and some of the music of the 90s. Everyone always is like raving about the soundtrack of this. This soundtrack is so depressing, but it's so good. And what's it got in it? Like, it gives credit to the soundtrack on here. No, it doesn't on this one. Damn it. Anyways, it's really good. It's all kind of like Seattle grungy, but like the good kind of grunge that's like kind of Mazzy Star kind of stuff. Anyway, I know there's like probably more that I want to say about this movie, but I'm sure everyone's going to make comments, and I'm going to be responding to any comments that people have about this one, especially in particular, because I have firsthand knowledge about it. And I wanted to also allow people to ask me questions about this. So feel free to comment, ask questions. I will answer any questions that people have about this or about recovery that people want to know. Definitely not going to tell anyone how to live their life, but I'll tell them how I have been sober for, you know, so many years, and how I stay that way, and how they can have it too. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe.
How do they see the film?
Oh, if you want to watch Black Tar Heroin, Darker in the Streets, just type that into YouTube, and there's always a video of this available, full length or like in parts. Sometimes they take it down, but someone puts it right back up. And thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and comment. And I love you all. And I'll talk to you again soon.